and welcome back, this time to the AFC West check-in. My name is Cecilia, and we are going to go over where things stand here in Week 8 in the AFC West. Now, leading the division is the Broncos, but I'm going to go through this in a sort of power rankings order, and I'm going to start with the Chiefs. I know that's controversial after that incredible fourth quarter showing from the Broncos against the Giants, but we're going to get into all of that. If you're a fan of one of these teams, let me know what you think of my takes, and more than anything, let me know what moves you think that your team might make at the deadline. I'm really curious, especially Raiders. What are the Raiders going to do with the deadline after starting 2-5? Now, let's get into this, starting with the Chiefs. So, the Chiefs are 4-3, and they're not number one in the division, but they sure look like they could be with how they're playing. I think against the Lions, they really proved themselves. And I think now they have Rashee Rice back, and I think he's a big asset. He looks really good in the red zone, and he looks really good on those quick routes, you know, whether it's just a quick hook in the flat or it's a crosser. I think he kind of is what Quentin Johnston was supposed to be. Not that, like, QJ looks great now. I'm not taking anything away from him, but in terms of how the Chiefs want to utilize him, we've only seen one game with him, but it looks to me like he's going to make a really big difference. He's really fast. Mahomes seems to trust him a lot, and I think that's going to make a big difference for them moving forward so that they don't have to depend so much on field goals, especially Butker's not having the best year, and I think anything they can do to get touchdowns rather than field goals is going to make a big difference. There were concerns over their running game. Isaiah Pacheco finally surpassed Mahomes as the lead rusher on their team. I'm sure those conversations in the running back room were pretty rough. You never want the quarterback to be the lead rusher. It's not a good look. Mahomes is too valuable for that. Brashard Smith, he's the young running back. They got him in the 7th round. It surprised me he didn't go sooner, but I understand that this was just such a vast running back talent group. I didn't spend a whole lot of time watching running backs this year because I just had this sense of, I don't care if my team takes one in the first round or in the last round. They just need to take one because all of these running backs are good, and you could take one in the first round and get a blue chip player, or you could take one in the 4th round, in the 5th round, and probably get a really solid option. And the Chiefs waited till the 7th round to draft their guy, and he looks pretty good. He's not their lead back by any means. I think there's still a good argument that the Chiefs need to trade for a running back, but they're at least trusting him with the ball more. And I think that could end up making a pretty big difference going forward. He's not averaging a high amount but per carry. I think it's 2.8, but I do think he can develop further. I think he was a good pick, and I think at some point they may want to move off of Pacheco, in which case, trading for a running back still makes sense. And to me, it makes more sense for the Chiefs to go after a Breece Hall type of person than it does for the Chargers or any of these teams that are more than one piece away from competing, just because you can always draft running backs. There's running backs in pretty much every draft. I know last year was exceptionally good, but there are definitely good options. I think at the top end, the best running backs in this next year's draft last year probably would have gone in the 2nd round, but there is still really good value to be had this year, in my opinion, looking at the running backs. The Chiefs' offensive line going into this season was the biggest concern because it was why they were in so many close games last year. It was why they couldn't hold their own against the Eagles in the Super Bowl, but they seem to have figured it out. And I think that starts with the center position. Creed Humphrey, he looks like center number 1 in the league. I'm not certain on that, but he looks really good. He is excellent in pass protection, excellent in run blocking, and it is amazing what a good center does for a team. And it's not just him. The whole line looks better than last year. They did put some resources into it, and it shows because they already had the resources in pass catchers. Rashee Rice is going to help, but they have great weapons. They, could use a running back, but they look really, really good on offense. And, I remember after they lost to the Eagles and the Chargers to start off the season, everyone, it seemed like, was saying, oh, the Chiefs are over, that's it. And I'm sitting there like, but they played against, at the time, 2 of the best teams in the league. Both the Eagles and the Chargers look a lot worse now, but they were playing both of these teams without Xavier Worthy, without Rashee Rice. Granted, it was their fault that they didn't have those players, but playing both of those teams without two of their lead pass catchers, I don't know. I don't think that was enough to write off a team that had just been to the Super Bowl and is arguably in the middle of a dynasty. So to me, that was kind of a silly conversation. Discounting the Chiefs does not make sense. As long as they have Mahomes and Andy Reid, they have a chance. Obviously, Travis Kelce's getting older. He's still making a difference. It's hard to read too much into that Raiders game because the Raiders are terrible, which I am very happy to get into. I think that's a lot of fun. Some comfort for every other team in the AFC West that we don't have to worry about the Raiders. Mahomes started off the season pretty rough. He didn't really look like himself, but I think he's gotten better every week since week 3. He didn't look amazing against the Raiders, but he didn't have to because it's the Raiders. But I think he is very accurate and very decisive on the quick game passes. And now that they have Rashee Rice, that's going to make a huge difference for them. Like I said, Travis Kelce isn't a factor every single week, but Noah Gray, he's the kind of tight end 2. They called him a backup tight end on the broadcast, and I was kind of like, I don't know, I feel like I want to give him more credit than that. I think he plays an important role on the team, and I think that role is going to grow over time as they look to Travis Kelce's future and, wanting to replace him. I think Noah Gray is a really good option for that, and I think he makes a really big difference in the pass game. And also, the Chiefs are a great example of how a good screen game can really throw off defenses. If you constantly have to worry about what's going on in the flats, you're way more vulnerable to those crossers up the middle. If the Chiefs just had a good run game, we would be looking at them as unstoppable and as a team that's going to challenge the Colts for number 1 in the AFC. They don't have a horribly hard schedule going forward. They're definitely going to be tested again, but their defense, we haven't talked much about their defense, but they struggle a bit against the run game. But when I say struggle, I mean that they're average. And to me, that's probably the biggest weakness on their team right now, is that they're average at stopping the run. Well, when your biggest weakness puts you at average, you're in a decent spot, and they still have a lot of time left to figure that out. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. And they're pretty good against the pass. They're one of the better teams. And going forward, there aren't a lot of big holes in this team. They've put a lot of resources in the trenches, and it shows. They finally got their weapons figured out. They're a really good team. And I don't think it makes sense that a lot of people are discarding them. I know they're not number 1 in the AFC West. I believe they're number 3 because they would be behind the Chargers, tied with their record, because the Chargers have the tiebreaker there. But going forward, I know that after the Broncos performance, and we'll get into that, but we should start talking about the Broncos next. Everyone's takeaway is like, oh, the Broncos they're going to win the AFC West. And as much as after that fourth quarter performance, you want to say, oh, absolutely they are, the Chiefs look really good, and they are going to be hard for the Broncos to deal with going forward, not just in terms of playing against them, but in terms of keeping up with them. So let's get into the Broncos. They're 5-2. In any other division, you'd be like, yeah, they're going to host a playoff game. Someone's going to have to go to Denver and get it done. And I just don't know that we can confidently say that with how the Chiefs are playing. Can the Broncos consistently keep up with the Chiefs? And they're definitely taking advantage of the Chargers' injury problems. They surpassed the Chargers in record this week. It was looking like they weren't going to do it, and Bo Nix and the offense got it done in the fourth quarter. This is the most interesting team in the AFC West, because on one hand, they have that game against the Giants, and you think, oh, at their best, this is the best team in the NFL. Their ceiling is the best team in the NFL, but their floor is like the Raiders. Anyone who watched that London game against the Jets would go, oh, this is embarrassing. This is not the product that the NFL wants to send overseas. This is awful. It seemed like Bo Nix barely showed up to that game. I know that the Jets defense is better than people give them credit for, but they still aren't good, right? They are not good. Make no mistake about it. And they're supposed to have a defensive identity. They got the defensive coach, but they don't look good. Only scoring 13 against them. It's really bad. And there are times when, you look at Bo Nix and you're like, I don't know who I'm going to get any given quarter. Sometimes you have this incredible passer, he can use his legs really effectively. Defenses have to respect that. That can open up that deep ball. And I want to say he's okay at throwing the deep ball. You have his game against the Chargers where he misses 3 deep passes that would have won them the game. And then you have other games where you're like, no, he's accurate. He can get this done. And he has the confidence. Clearly, he and Sean Payton sat down and went, okay, we're going to throw the ball this year. We're not going to be so safe. But we also see him throw some really dumb interceptions, and it's confusing to watch because you're like, how can both of these be true? I look at this guy and I go, no, he has the talent. I think Bo Nix has the talent. I think he's going to figure it out by the end of the season. It's just a matter of you're racing against the Chiefs. Can you win the division against Mahomes, Andy Reid, and an offense that has finally figured out their offensive line? They might trade for a running back. I don't know. I don't know if the Broncos can figure that out. I do think they can make the playoffs regardless. The AFC is still up for grabs. The Broncos absolutely can get a wild card playoff spot. But, when you're aiming for a Super Bowl, you obviously want to host that playoff game, and I'm just not sure that they can do that. And I think one of the reasons Broncos fans get so frustrated with this team is because, you have these performances like against the Giants where you're like, oh, this is electric. We have it. We have what it takes. We can get lightning in a bottle in those moments where we need it. And then you have the beginning of that game and some of their other games where Bo Nix is looking to his first read, throwing to his first read, and then throws the ball straight into the ground. You're like, what? But he didn't have pressure. He's throwing to his first read. It is everything that they drew up, and he's just making a bad pass. There was a point in the Giants game where he was 4 for 18. It was terrible. And then he starts figuring it out, and his receivers can't catch the ball. And you're just like, well, okay, I thought Bo Nix was the problem. Now they're the problem. And I think what's frustrating is that the passing game has everything going. It has a fantastic defense to work with, one of the best defensive fronts in the NFL, arguably the best defensive front. They have a good run game in J.K. Dobbins. I'm very familiar with J.K. Dobbins and his game. I think he's a very good running back. I don't think he's super reliable on those short runs, but over the course of a game, he absolutely provides enough offense for the quarterback to play off of it. And then you just end up with a passing game that sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not, So I do think that they can figure it out. They have one of the best offensive lines in football. They have such good protection back there that I have to believe that Bo Nix is going to figure it out. If he were constantly under pressure, then I would think, yeah, he doesn't really have the space. He doesn't have the clean reps that it takes to figure it out, but I think he does. And I could easily see him being a top 8 quarterback, maybe even better. Certainly in the AFC. In the AFC, I think he's easily a top 5 quarterback. But the NFC is starting to figure it out with these quarterbacks, especially some of the younger guys, and you still have your Matthew Staffords and your Baker Mayfields. Long-term, is Jaden Daniels going to be the guy? Caleb Williams looks really, really good. I just think, in terms of the top-level quarterbacks, it's starting to be difficult again to claim that title. But I think Bo Nix can do it. I really do. Going back to what the Broncos look like moving forward, they have a relatively easy strength of schedule left. It's not super easy, but they absolutely should be able to go over 500 left. And if they can do that, yeah, they're contending for the division. And more importantly, they're securing a wild card berth to the playoffs. I don't think that's a very hot take after last weekend's game. All right. On to the Chargers. Now, objectively, the Chargers are second in their division just because of the tiebreaker with the Chiefs, but I am very frustrated with how the Chargers have been playing. And you guys know that. This is a Chargers channel. I've been covering the Chargers, but it's one of those things where it's like, how many years in a row are we going to say, but if they didn't have these injuries? And this year is significantly worse than in previous years. I'm not trying to downplay that, but it's frustrating that they go from, oh, they might be contending for the division to, well, I hope they can still get in the playoffs, right? And to have that conversation when they're over 500 is really frustrating. One of the most frustrating things is their early draft picks have been hurt. Joe Alt has been hurt. Maybe he can come back this week. Amarian Hampton has been hurt. He's on IR, and he's predicted to stay on IR longer than he has to, which is really frustrating. And more than anything, the defense has been falling apart. I don't know if you guys watch those post-game interviews, but Derwin James looks so dejected, and I can see that he's going out there and he's playing fast. He's doing everything he can to bring the communication together. And even in the game, on the broadcast, I feel like I see his frustration. And in the film, you see he's constantly yelling to his teammates, constantly signaling, trying to get everyone on the same page. And people are responding to that, teammates are responding, but I don't know what this defense can do. Now you have Elijah Molden out. If the defense can't turn it around, the Chargers don't make the playoffs. I think it's that simple. I don't think this offense, with how injured it is, can outrun how bad their defense is right now. And that's not what we thought would happen going into this year. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the explanation is, because we've seen how good Jesse Minter can be, and he was consistently that good last year. It just blows my mind. And obviously on the offensive side, you have Justin Herbert. No matter what the play calling looks like, I can be frustrated with Greg Roman in the red zone. I can be frustrated with the lack of resources put into offensive line depth. But you have Justin Herbert, and so he can turn things around. But on the defensive side, they don't have the guys. They have Derwin James, they have Thule, and now they have Odafe Oweh. But you can't count on Khalil Mack being out there every week. And Deion Henley looks terrible. I don't know what happened. He started off as a Pro Bowl conversation guy, and now it's not looking great. And he's under contract for another year. But I was thinking, they're going to want to give him an extension maybe going into this offseason when they have more cap to work with, as opposed to the following year when they have even more extensions. The Chargers are going to have to... They have 24 players up for free agency next year, and then a bunch of players that it would be smart to extend early. You're looking at Thule, Quentin Johnston. So, it's just one of those things where I'm like, they now have so many needs on defense that the draft isn't going to be enough. They're going to have to spend money this next offseason, and they've set themselves up relatively well to do it. And that's something I want to keep an eye on. How many players are they going to want to re-sign? And then how many draft needs are they going to have after they re-sign these players? And how many players can they afford? I wonder if they're going to want to get ahead of the Derwin James extension. That I could see them doing that. That would cost them a lot of their cap this offseason, but they're going to have to be willing to spend, because the Justin Herbert Super Bowl window is wide open. He is in the prime of his career. It's really frustrating how the roster has been handled. And because of all the injuries, I want the Chargers to be less conservative in the preseason. I know that it makes sense to try to protect everybody, keep everybody healthy, but I think the Chargers would be better off having a really tough physical preseason, let injuries happen if they may, but everyone who plays is fully game ready. I think maybe that prevents some of these injuries actually in the season, because if you're not in game shape, you're probably going to get hurt. And I think about Najee Harris having that weird eye injury and not being ready to play just because he's not in shape, because he hasn't been able to run, and then going into the game and immediately getting an injury. I don't know. It's just a thought I've had. I'm not physically there for training camp. I'm not physically there for practices and even OTAs and stuff. So I don't know how physical it is. I just have to think that the Chargers have to lean into one of these approaches to prevent injuries. It can't just be, we won't play any guys in the preseason. We won't, push anyone in the offseason, because they're getting hurt anyways. You know what I mean? They may as well get ready. The Chargers, it seems, are going to get hurt no matter what. You may as well show up game ready with the guys you do have left. I think this offense is going to be really good once you have Joel, Amarian Hampton, Trey Pipkins back. Not that I think Trey Pipkins is amazing. I just want Bobby Hart off the field. I just want Austin Deculus off the field. Whatever it takes. Apparently Jamari Sawyer was still somewhat hurt last game, which was why Foster Sorrell still got a lot of the snaps. So he might be back this week. So we will see if Joel is back. We definitely kind of keep an eye on these injuries. I'm not going to preview the Vikings game until tomorrow, I think, because I want as much injury information as I can get. But this offense, they have their pass catchers of the future. You look at the young guys, so Keenan Allen aside, it'd be nice if they re-signed him, but Keenan Allen aside, you have Ladd, you have QJ, you have Rondé Gadsden. That's enough, and you have Trey Harris, you have Keandre Lambert-Smith. It's possible that those guys turn into important players. I think it's possible that in the next couple years, Keandre Lambert-Smith could turn into a good returner. Maybe he can turn into a good, speedy, deep option. That's something the Chargers need. But Trey Harris looks really good at blocking. He got somewhat involved in pass catching last game. Hopefully that's something that throughout the year can go up a little bit. But that's really good because that means that next season the Chargers on the offensive side only really need to put resources into the trenches and potentially another running back. Depending on how they feel about Amarian Hampton and Kamani Vidal, I think they need another running back, but we'll see if they make any moves at the deadline to address that. Speaking of the deadline, they could trade for a running back. They could trade for a defensive tackle. I think that might make a difference with all the injuries. I think Deshaun Hand going down makes a bigger difference than we think. Teair Tart got hurt. It's not clear to me if he'll play this week, how bad that situation is. But either way, I just don't think they have the depth right now that they need for the defensive line. And I think the defensive line could end up being a strength going forward. So if they can trade for a guy who's under contract for a couple of years, that might end up making a difference. They only have $3.4 million-ish in cap space left. And you always want a little bit of wiggle room. So if they were to trade for someone, outside of a really young player, they are probably going to have to restructure some contracts to get that done, but they could do it. They have the space to do it. I think the main questions for the Chargers are, can Deion Henley figure it out? Or do we need a linebacker? Deion Henley has proven his ceiling is absolutely incredible. It feels like he never recovered from the flu, but it's been a few weeks now. He needs to get back. He absolutely needs to get right. Otherwise, the Chargers are going to have to replenish this linebacker room because he and Troy Dye just aren't getting it done. Denzel Perryman was on quite a snap count last week. Hopefully he can be back. I think that would make a big difference for the run defense. But the next question is, can the defensive line get at the quarterback in the meantime? I think Tuli's having a good year. You want to see Odafe Away continue to produce, but can the interior also pull their weight? Can Teair Tart get after the quarterback? Can Jamari Caldwell keep developing? And can we afford to not have to use our first round draft pick on the defensive line? I don't know. Right now I'm thinking that we just have to. You can get good offensive line players later in the draft. Either way, they need some juice from that first round draft pick, but if they can make a trade for someone, free up their needs, that could make a really big difference. Let's move on to the Raiders, the one that I have the most joy in discussing because it is the one going best for me as a Chargers fan. The Raiders are 2-5. And the reason that is so important is because they have a pretty difficult remaining schedule. Going into this season, you look at Geno Smith as a slightly below average to average quarterback. He's not amazing, but he had been pretty reliable. He had that history with Pete Carroll. So Pete Carroll goes and trades a third-round pick for Geno Smith, and you go, well, that's not bad for a quarterback. It'll get you through the year, get you to next year, and then you can draft your quarterback. Now it looks pretty bad. Geno Smith definitely has an interception problem. He is tied with Tua Tagovailoa with 10 interceptions. You never want to be in the Tua conversation as a quarterback. Certainly not this year. He's very indecisive, especially once he gets out of the pocket. You saw that really burn him against the Chiefs, who have a good defensive line. And if you look at him at the podium after games, he is willing to blame teammates for his mistakes. And you have to believe that is part of the reason that the Raiders are kind of losing the locker room. Max Crosby looks so frustrated every game. Man, Max Crosby, talk about a waste of an incredible career. And I'm not someone who thinks that, if a player never wins a Super Bowl, that's a waste. But at least getting to be on a competitive team. The Raiders haven't really been that competitive since he's been there. They've had years where they've had some serious flashes, but man, Max Crosby is a one-man wrecking crew. I think he is the best defensive line player in the league. And I don't think it's close. I know there's an argument for your Myles Garrett and your other edge rushers, but Max Crosby doesn't just get after the quarterback. You can see he plays every play, even when he's pinning his ears back and going really hard. He plays it really smart. That's why he's able to get his hands up. He finally got an interception this year. He's also really good at setting the edge in the run game. He's one of those players that you have to keep track of on the field no matter what. And besides the fact, what if he had an amazing player opposite him? I don't think he does. You also go, man, he's not going to be in his prime for much longer. I mean, maybe he will, right? Khalil Mack has proven that, he can still be a dog after all these years, but it's harder and harder for him to stay on the field. And you have to wonder, is is that where Max Crosby's going to go? Because after all this time, the defense isn't backing him up. And the defense is supposed to be what the Raiders can hang their hat on. That's the thing that they can depend on, but they just can't. They allowed the Chiefs to score 31 really fast and then just kind of wait for the game to end. And that's just depressing. And you can't have a bad quarterback and a bad defense. But they do have a really good running back. Ashton Jeanty looks amazing when he actually gets the ball. He had 6 carries against the Chiefs. 4 of those were in the first half, and one of them was just to end the half. You know, there was like 8 seconds left on the clock, and they just wanted to burn that. What a waste. He was your first-round draft pick. And I think about, they could have gotten Jackson Dart. They could have gotten Tyler Booker, Gray Zabel, maybe an edge or a linebacker. And not because I think that those players are absolutely amazing, just that the Raiders have all of these needs. Their offensive line is terrible, and they picked a running back. And they're not even going to hand it off to him? They're not even going to give him a chance? He's not bad into contact. Give him a chance, even if the blocking isn't there. To me, that's inexcusable in the first half when you have a quarterback just handing the ball away like he does. You know, I don't understand, and I know that's something Raiders fans are frustrated at because they were so excited for the Ashton Jeanty pick. I thought it was a great pick. I thought they have to go either Ashton Jeanty or offensive line, and they picked Ashton Jeanty. So the use of him is just mind-blowing, man. And that's been the case all year. It's not just in the last few games where you're like, well, the Raiders are down, they need to get some passing plays going. Now, in the first half, 4 carries. That's inexcusable. Against a division rival, you're not getting the ball in your best offensive player's hands. I know that, Brock Bowers has had injuries this year. It's just, you have 2 picks in the first round, back-to-back years, where you invest in guys of the future. Brock Bowers ends up having a record-setting rookie year. Why won't you let Ashton Jeanty get his opportunity for that? You have an opportunity to develop him. At this point, surely you know that the Raiders, they're not going to the playoffs. They're not going to be anything amazing. Okay, let's develop our young guys. Let's see what we have in them. Let's see if we can develop their strengths. And they just don't seem interested in that. And, I think about them not taking quarterbacks. Obviously, 2 years ago, they thought they were going to get Michael Penix, and that's why they ended up with Brock Bowers. And, Tom Telesco did the whole, we didn't panic. We're taking the best player available. And now it's like, okay, 2 years later, you're still looking for a quarterback. And now you have to ask, do you want any of the quarterbacks next year? There are maybe 4 quarterbacks who are going to be drafted high as future starters in the NFL. And Mendoza is looking better and better out of Indiana. He does kind of have the Ohio State problem where it's like, you kind of have everything going for you around you. It's a little harder to judge where you individually are because you don't have to elevate your team so much when you have a top 5 team. But he's still improving every game. Carson Beck still has his interception problem. At this point, you got to look at that and go, that's who he is. Sellers has been on the rise. Kaliak Manis out of Rutgers has been on the rise. Dante Moore out of Oregon. There are definitely guys, but this quarterback class is nowhere near as good as a couple years ago, as I would argue even last year. The Raiders have missed opportunities to get a quarterback, and it's just not something that I thought that they would have to deal with once they got Tom Brady on board, but I don't know. They are ranked 24th in points allowed per game on defense, and defense is supposed to be their thing. Geno Smith looks terrible. The locker room just looks so disgruntled and confused, and they still have playmakers, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, Ashton Jeanty. I don't know. How many years in a row are we going to say, well, this is just a rebuild year? They also have a pretty difficult remaining schedule, and I just don't see it going well. As a Chargers fan, I hope that they do well in their remaining schedule because I don't want them to have a high draft pick. I don't want them to get their pick of quarterback, and if they do, I want it to cost them draft capital to trade up. They absolutely can get one of the top quarterbacks next year. I think anyone picking in the first round can, but I personally would not give any of next year's quarterbacks a first round grade at this point. There's still a lot of season left. We're going to see, what does Mendoza look like in the playoffs? What does Dante Moore look like in the playoffs? Probably. We're going to see these big games. We're going to be able to evaluate, but right now, The only reason quarterbacks will be taken in the first round is because teams are desperate and quarterbacks fly off the board and are consistently overdrafted. That's just how the quarterback position works. So the Raiders are not in a good position going forward, and they have the misfortune of being in a division where you have 3 pretty good quarterbacks. And that's underselling it, right? You have Mahomes, one of the best of all time. You have Justin Herbert. I don't need to explain to you why Justin Herbert is amazing. I would say every NFL GM except like maybe 5 would prefer Herbert over their quarterback. And you have Bo Nix, who, yeah, he's rough around the edges, but he's figuring it out, man. Bo Nix is going to be really good. And then you have the Raiders, who don't have a quarterback at all. It's unfortunate, but this has been the AFC West check-in. Let me know what you think of what I said about your team, and also let me know, how do you think your team plays out in the future? Do you think that they are buyers or sellers at the deadline? What do you think their next move is going to be? And do you think the Chiefs are one player away? Do you think the Broncos are only a couple players away? Let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much for being here. This has been the State of the AFC West, or AFC West check-in. My name is Cecilia. I will be back to preview the Vikings game very soon. And I will see you all next time. Let me know what you guys think of what I said of your team. Is your team a buyer or seller at the deadline? What does that look like? Are they a player away? Do they need to just throw the whole season away? What do you guys think? Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you guys next time.